Before I begin the video, a quick shout out to Jay's advice. He had the original idea for the series, the problems with the series, where he covers his retro formats that he's knowledgeable about and covers the problems with those formats. He covered the eras from 2004 all the way to about, I believe, 2009. So if you want to check those videos out, I highly recommend it. I'll have them linked in the description. I'm going to be doing the series on my channel to cover the formats that I'm knowledgeable in and talk about the reasons why they're good, the reasons why they're bad, etc. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you've been paying attention in the last few weeks, you've probably seen some Heart Gold to Silver to Noble Victories format gameplay uploaded to the channel. I want to do that in preparation for this video where I talk about the problems of the Heart Gold to Silver to Noble Victories format. Now if you don't know, this format is a mid-season format that happened in 2011. After the 2011 Worlds and the mid-season rotation before that, we were left with only the Heart Gold to Silver cards up to whatever recent release we had. 2011 Worlds was black and white, and after black and white we received Emerging Powers, and then we received Noble Victories. In regards to this, I think that Noble Victories is a very cool format, and I just want to say that starting off. I think it's a cool format in that there's a lot of very cool archetypes in the format that really make it fun to look back on. However, I think because of the flaws of the format, there is a lot of problems that make the gameplay very shallow and don't really make it fun on replay or playing against certain matchups, which makes the format less popular than mid-season formats like, let's just say, Sun and Moon 2 Lost Thunder from years later. The first and obviously biggest problem that happened both with 2011 Worlds and this format is the first turn rules. For those who do not know, the first turn rules in this format allow you to play whatever cards you like on your first turn, meaning you can play a supporter, you can play items, stadiums, tools, but you can also attach energy, draw a card for turn, and attack. There is no restriction other than that of the gameplay restrictions like evolution. So what this did was it immediately caused a problem, and it's why there was the mid-season rotation, is because cards from the Diamond and Pearl era were not meant to play with this rule set, so they ended up breaking the game. In black and white, these cards are a little bit more prepared to play with the rule set, but it does create a bad feeling. The person who goes first is always at a significant advantage, no matter what. In a mirror, whoever goes first will almost surely decide the game if they draw well. You essentially just have to prey on your opponent missing what they need or getting unlucky, which leads to some really bad things. At the time, it also led to Tie Rogue. This was seen more at 2011 Worlds, but it is still present in this format to a small extent. It does 30 damage for 0 energy, meaning on the first turn, you can retreat into it, and then just hopefully donk your opponent to win the game. It's really that bad that this format has this first turn rules. Really, if we wanted a better format, you'd have to adapt the rules to be more like the X and Y and Sun and Moon rules, where you cannot attack. I also don't think it would be bad if this format just didn't have Pokemon Collector for turn 1, because these big basic decks really benefit from that. So maybe something like Holland Mentor could benefit this format. Not that I'm talking about changing it, it's just how it is. And when first turn rules benefit going first no matter what, guess what survives the best? That's big, consistent basics. Decks that can set up really easily, decks that can attack on the very first turn of the game, thrive. Here we have some representations here, and I will bring you over to PTCG Archive and show you some of the lists right here. Obviously my lists are a little bit different than some of these, but these are the kind of decks that were around at the time. If you notice this deck right here, all basics. If we go down to Cake right here, it is all basics besides one support stage 1 line that does not attack. If we go down to the Lake deck, it is also all basics with that one stage 1 line. And if we go down to Zekrom down here, it is once again almost all basics besides the stage 1 line. Or if you go into the Zekrom deck, it is all stage 1 or all basics. What this does is it creates a problem in that the depth of gameplay is not at all very strong. Basic only formats don't have different power levels of evolving, which means that the stronger card or the card that hits weakness is basically just always going to win. And it's just really unfortunate. In this format we see a very unique exception to this in the fact that Virizion is very strong. These first turn rules that make the format very bad, in a way, benefit Virizion perfectly because it's able to use double draw in the first turn of the game and then start attacking immediately after, making it the best start in a deck like Six Corners, and that's why it runs so many copies of them. That deck almost single-handedly revolves around this card. In other decks, it's just big basics, and you just power them up on turn 1, power them up on turn 2 again, probably accelerate some energy into play, and now you're just hitting every turn of the game. We get this very, very stark contrast between these big, fast, aggressive, big basic decks, which are not very in-depth decks, not very doing anything interesting, really, and the other half of the format, which is the degenerate decks. And I say that with all the love in the world because I love Chandelure. It is my favorite deck in this format. But the other decks in this format that are not big basics are decks that completely shut down those decks from playing the game. One of them, the most infamous, is Durant. Durant mills the top card of your opponent's deck for each Durant you have in play, which sounds alright because obviously modern players know this attack, but it's significantly better in this format because it can live hits. It can get up to 100 HP essentially and live attacks like the Gaia Hammer, or like a boosted Leaf Wallop, or like an Iron Breaker. It can live those attacks, and that's why it's broken. If we go over to the Durant list on PTCG Archive for an example, this list really has it all. My list is obviously a little bit different. I play a Smoochum here for energy disruption, but Durant in this format gets Crushing Hammer, which is very strong, obviously, for removing energy. It gets Pokémon Catcher, which is an issue in itself, Guaranteed Gust, but we'll talk about that in a bit. It has recovery cards, Revive and Super Rod. It has guaranteed special energy removal with Loss Removers, special metal to give it 80 HP, Eviolite to give it 100 HP, Junk Arm for any of these cards, Twins, because it's always going to be behind on prizes. It can just search whatever cards it wants out every turn, and Rotom, which means that you're never prizing the wrong Durant piece because you can just get it out. All these things have led to Durant being one of the most toxic decks in the format, and to make it worse, it's legitimately a contender for a tier 1 deck. It's really tier 1 or 2 depending on it because it is really boom or bust, but the deck is legitimately strong enough to hold against decks, even when you get a good starter such as Six Corners. If you watched my game where I played Six Corners against Durant, I had a good starter and I did not do anything unnecessary, yet you still lose just because of the deck's ability to throttle you a couple of times is really all that it needs. On the second part of this, we have the item lock decks. Chandelure is the most infamous of this. Item locks your opponent, spreads damage, spreads special conditions, and just heals off damage. In a similar vein, Vanillux tanks hits and then will paralyze your opponent infinitely while healing off damage, so it cannot be knocked out when they get knocked out. And all of this is due to Vileplume. In this format, Vileplume is a necessity almost for these evolution decks. You don't see many evolution decks without Vileplume, and that's because Vileplume blocks trainer cards. What is the most important trainer card in this format? Why, it is Pokemon Catcher. So if we bring up Pokemon Catcher real quick, there you are. Pokemon Catcher, this is the errata print. In this format's wording, this is the updated image, but in this format's wording, the card says, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon when they're active. It does not require a coin flip, meaning that this is guaranteed Gust, and because of Junk Arm, your opponent can Gust whenever they like. They always have the Gust. So evolution decks cannot succeed in a format where these big basics can just one-hit KO them and always Gust them up. So evolution decks that do succeed rely on locking the opponent out of playing the game via Vileplume, turning off usually about half of their deck. If we go look at a deck, for instance, Chandelure here, you get the Vileplume into play, you get the Dodrio into play, and you just swap between Chandelures, using its ability to put damage on the field and then attacking when need be to prevent your opponent from ever knocking you out. This deck is really oppressive, and while I think it's very fun to play, I also acknowledge that it's not a fun deck to play against. These lock decks, like Chandelure, like Vanillux, Victini here, they're not at all fun decks to play against because they just stop your opponent from playing the game. Your opponent either stops you from getting the setup or they lose the game. They're similar to Truth in 2011, but they're a lot stronger due to the archetypes having very good attackers instead of having to rely on suboptimal attackers and hitting weakness. We also have Gothitelle Reuniclus, a little bit of an underrated deck, not on the PTCG archive sheet, but it was, I believe, an idea piloted around at the time. Gothitelle locks items, Reuniclus moves off your damage, so you get the item lock on your opponent without item locking yourself. And this is just obviously incredibly very strong. When you have this item lock on your opponent, almost half of their deck just becomes dead immediately due to how strong things like Junk Arm are in the format and how much decks rely on Pokemon Catcher to gust up Pokemon and win the game. Pokemon Catcher is, again, just a problem in itself and a reason why this format has a hard time sticking around in people's hearts, but also just the consistent item lock, the mill decks, and even the TheLostZone lock. Really kind of an underground deck here, but TheLostZone lock where you get your opponent to 6 Pokemon in the TheLostZone and just win the game immediately. Essentially, this meta here is made up of 50% big basics and 50% 100% lock decks, making up that 100%. It's very similar in a way, if you would think about it, to the base set era formats, where half of the formats was made up of basics like Haymaker and, Mewtwo's, Scythers, Electabuzzes, and then the other half was made up of stall decks like Lickitung or like Moltres Mew, Metal Mewtwo, things like that. These old formats have a lot of these problems too from the base era because of the way the cards are designed. And it's because these cards are so simple in a way, and they favor big basic Pokemon. Something like a Zekrom with 130 HP is going to have more HP or the same amount as these Stage 2 Pokemon, which are extremely difficult to set up, especially in a format with Pokemon Catcher. One of the biggest problems with setting these evolution decks up, other than Catcher, other than Chandelure, and other than these big basic Pokemon, is specifically Kyurem. Kyurem's Glaciate attack does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. They can get this powered up on the second turn of the game with the Electrode, and then they're just going to be spreading on your board every single turn. It cannot be understated that if your opponent gets the turn 2 Kyurem off with the Electrode Prime, they are going to win the game against most evolution decks. The only ones that can beat them are decks like Chandelure, which immediately respond with an item lock. It is really that one-sided.